When I just look at the texture of the listed pool here in India, Bala, what is the sense that you're getting? I mean, of course, the index weightage aside, but in your conversations, where is it that you see structural stories getting built in India, which is getting reimagined as we speak?
I think the digital story in India is very, very strong. The financialization of savings that is happening in the country is very, very strong. The third thing is India is no more restricted to the top 10, 15, 20 cities. It is much, much more broader. There are activities that is happening in places which hitherto you wouldn't have even talked about it. The number of airports that is actually getting constructed in tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 cities in India, that basically will mean that the pressure on some of the big cities is actually going to reduce over the next 5, 7, 10 years' time. And there is going to be more and more availability of opportunity across India. Now, if I take an example of what is happening in consulting firms and what's happening in IT companies, today a large part of the workforce is not going to be in the top 10 cities in India. They're actually getting into some of those newer places like Orissa, some parts of southern India, not the traditional Chennai, Bombay, Hyderabad, etc., but some of the other places where the quality of talent is equally good. Attrition rates are much lower. The cost is much cheaper. And people have an option of staying with family instead of moving away from family. That means that the pull factor for these companies to go into those markets is only increasing. So at the moment some of these companies go into those markets, imagine the consumption theme that is actually going to start driving in those places. And then the affordability index, et cetera, will all start improving, which means that the growth is going to be more structural and more diversified rather than concentrated in few pockets.
But in the very near term, Bala, the whole affordability factor, and at some point, maybe the high oil prices will be, passed on to consumers. That inflation hit, do you think the consumption sector will be able to absorb? Because there's only that much they'll be able to pass through without worrying about volumes.
So internally, I think our economist in Citi basically is thinking about a potential uptick in the inflation rate. Assuming that at some point in time the government will start passing on some bit of the increase in crude price to the pump level. So I think that will mean that maybe at least another 60 to 75 basis points increase in inflation is quite possible, right? So that is one. The second thing is India actually has done a good job in the last few months as we ran into this Middle Eastern conflict by diversifying our supply sources. Instead of too fragmented and too concentrated on certain countries for our supplies. Again, these are long-term trends. This will take time. And as long as you're able to identify new sources of supplies, that ensures that, despite some of these hiccups that we are facing, that will ensure that, the supply source doesn't get drained out. So inflation, I would expect that there is a potential possibility of uptick. We do not expect too negative impact on growth. Maybe a 25 to 50 basis points cut in growth could be possible, assuming this continues for a longer period of time. But at least the good thing is if you see the last 7, 10 days, both the parties are looking at finding a solution. Now, if that happens, then things will potentially not impact India in any much negative way.